Lisa Calderon, and I am so excited to join you and the Latinx House in celebrating the filmmakers and artists whose films were selected to be a part of the Sundance Film Festival. I mean, come on! From the films that honor our culture, our ancestors, our roots, to the activists who are doing the groundwork in our communities and for our communities, the power that each of us holds to share our world is so incredible. The conversation of building the Latinx communities and embracing and wielding us is so important, especially at a time like now. So again, thank you for allowing me to be here with you, and congratulations to each and every one of you.
Hi, everyone. This is Monica Ramirez, co-founder of the Latinx House. I, along with Olga Segura and Alex Martinez Kondraki, the other co-founders of Latinx House, are so pleased to have you here with us. We are going to have an amazing conversation about something that is so important to all of us, which is our power. We're going to have a conversation about building power in the Latinx community during this virtual panel as a part of our partnership with the Ford Foundation. And I don't know if you heard the news, but we announced the creation of a Latinx Learning Lab. And part of that lab is going to include critical conversations on different topics that matter to the Latinx community. And this one, our power, is one of those that is essential to those conversations. So really excited to announce that partnership and the series of conversations that we'll be having. And this one, we are so fortunate to have some of our friends with us to talk more about how we are powerful and how we are using that power. In today's conversation, which is being moderated by my friend, Tori Gavito, who is the president of Way to Win. She'll also be joined by panelists Carmen Perez, also my hermana, everyone on this panel, incredible, my dearest friends. Carmen is the co-founder of Poderistas and CEO of the Gathering for Justice. Fabiana Rodriguez is president of the Center for Cultural Power. And Vico Ortiz is award-winning actor and activist who are here with us to discuss this really important topic, where our community is often cast as a singular body of people. They talk about us as a monolith, and they often aren't talking about our power. And I just want to say a super special thank you to our panelists for being part of this conversation. And I'm going to kick it over to Tori, who's going to lead this convo.
Monica, thank you so much. I'm Tori Gavito, president and co-founder of Way to Win. I'm also pleased to announce that we too, in partnership with Ford Foundation, OSF, and others, are launching a fund specific to building power in the Latinx community. It is a fund that we've been working on for several years. We're launching it this year under a new name that I think everyone will be pleased to know is Valiente, because we do understand the power of this community and everything that we're building together. And so I am so thrilled to have this conversation with Carmen and with Fabi and with Vico. I am trying really hard not to start with Vico and ask, like, please tell me what the real behind the scenes was at American Horror Story, because I am legit American Horror Story fan. But that's kind of the point of why we're here, isn't it? It's that stories have power. We're all glued to them. The media, like for better or worse, has the power to wield consensus making. It has the power to tell the country, to tell the world what is normal and what is not normal, what is hype, what is not hype, what is now and what is not now. And we all have to think about the power that we have as artists and political operatives and mothers and activists and all the things that we call ourselves, all the things I call myself, about, you know, what we're doing to really push the media landscape to tell new stories, to shape new wisdoms, because it is time. It is time for whole new wisdoms. And so with that kickoff, I really want each of you to just go through quickly and tell me how it is that you approach power in the work that you do. I mean, I think the idea of being an activist is just sometimes nebulous for folks. Like, we don't have many models of activism. So I want to kick it off and have everyone share, you know, how they approach power and activism in their own landscape. And I think I'm going to start with Fabi.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tori. And I'm so excited to be here. Well, first, I grew up in the city where Black Power was created, and that is Oakland, California. And so early on, I learned about political power and economic power. And my mentors even taught me about earth power. And as I, grew up in the age of hip hop and also the age of the war on drugs, I realized that there was another kind of power, and that's cultural power, right? The ability to see ourselves reflected in the culture around us and to make culture that reflects who we are, right? Because so many of us are the children of displaced peoples, and there's a culture we want to keep, and there's also some culture that we need to release. And so when I think about, for me, there's a lot of power in art, in film, television, children's books, what you see in the visual culture on billboards, on the covers of magazines, the books that we read every day in classrooms. And what I understand is that in this country, all of the cultural ecosystem, and I'm talking about publishing, performance, theater, television, film, entertainment, it is dominated by white men at the very top ranks of leadership. And so what that means is that we're experiencing American culture through a white lens, overwhelmingly male, straight, cis, and that has real impacts. It has, of course, an impact on our imagination, but it also renders us invisible. And it allows for the exploitation for really an extractive economy to be normalized. And so for me, when I think about what power is, it's the ability to tell stories and create culture that actually normalizes another way forward. And that way forward is a world in which we can all thrive and we're in a better relationship with Mother Earth, but also that we get to see ourselves reflected with dignity, right? Not just pain, but that dignity and as a kind of core part of the fabric that makes this country up.
I love that. I love, what you just shared in your experience of how culture is shaped by boardrooms that are filled with white cis men. I mean, that's my experience too as a political operative, going into spaces where it's totally dominated by an older generation. And there have been times when I've said, y'all, like the people are in Atlanta, the people are in Tucson, Arizona, like the people are in Houston, Texas. Like this is no longer a Midwest story. And I get so much pushback. So when I think about all the industries where this is happening, but certainly the industry where you all are leaders, like it is time for change. And I'm just so proud of the work that you all do, which is why I think I'm going to bring in Carmen now to talk a little bit about the work that you've been building, really building grassroots power and power of Latinas over time. Share with me what your sense of power is and what your, what systems you're changing through this, the lever that you hold.
Of course, it's so good to be in community with all of you and so happy to be here. And so for me, I think, power means so many things to our communities. And I think one of the things that I really try to create is an environment where there's a lane for everybody. I think about, what do you bring to the table? Fabiana talked about art, right? As well as there's, food, the way in which we share stories, we build solidarity. I also grew up in a very multiracial, multicultural environment right outside of Los Angeles in a community called Oxnard. My parents were farm workers, but the people who taught me, the people who were my coaches were all African American. And so I really lived at the intersection of all these identities, with really my own identity being hip hop and basketball, right? And so, one of the things that I remember doing is I remember my mom baking on Sundays. She'd have us baking and it was for church. And that was the way in which she really was able to build community. And so when I say there's a lane for everybody, I think about like, what do you bring to the table? What gift do you have? And how can you actually bring that to the work that we do? And in the coalitions that I build, they're intergenerational, they're intercultural. It's always important to learn the story of self and learn the story of who you're actually building with. You never know what people have gone through, right? I think about the Latino community in this country and, how we are not a monolith, the fact that we have so many identities, we have so many ethnic backgrounds, we have so many different foods. I live in New York right now, and I have been immersed in the Dominican Puerto Rican culture as a Chicana, as a Mexican American woman, and really loving the fact that I'm able to partake in that. But I also know that our stories are different as well as they're common. Knowing that my father, who was a Chicano born in 1924, his family was deported under the Repatriation Act. And so making sure that those stories are being told. Black and brown solidarity has been built, not now, but really in the past, when the Chicano movement went to the Black liberation movement to learn about how they could actually stop the killings in their communities by police. And so I feel like if people knew that there was a lane for them, if people knew that we could come together to build solidarity, that we could, be grounded in something bigger than ourselves. We ground our communities in Kenyan nonviolence through Poderistas. What we learned was that, through conversation and also looking at the data, that although Latinos were the largest demographic in the United States, that there was a major confidence gap, particularly with Latinas. And that was one of the many reasons why we wanted to create Poderistas, was to give power and voice to our people, especially the Latina women who we are, who we love, our mothers, our abuelitas, and also our daughters, our nieces, and everybody who's in the community, building it together for the future, not just of now, but the future of the next 7 generations.
Awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. Okay, so Vico, you are bringing so much newness into this world, into the world that you're bringing forth with your acting. So curious what it means to wield power now that you're in the position you're in these storylines that you're able to participate in.
Wow. First of all, I am so incredibly inspired. I'm like vibrating right now, listening to to all of you right now. It's really beautiful what I'm like experiencing, even through a Zoom panel. So I thank you for your energy and all of the work that you all do. I'm like ignited right now. So how do I claim that sense of power? And yes, it's a very interesting position that I am in right now, but I'm also really I've come to this point very intentionally. I have made it a point since I came out to portray queer characters on film and TV and on stage. And because I've made it a point to do that, even if the character wasn't originally written to be queer, I have played a huge variety of characters because I want us to get out of the mindset that if I only portray queer characters and if only queer people portray queer characters, then we're putting ourselves in a box. And that is so far from the truth. I have been able to to play a sergeant in the military, a pirate, a psych major college student, a sober performance artist, an educator, the jealous best friend, the supportive partner. I have been able to be so many different people, and they all happen to be Latine and non-binary. Voila, that's that, the same way that Emma Stone has played so many white characters and they're all cis women, in the same way that Leo DiCaprio has played so many white characters and they're all cis men. Like, it literally is just that. And I think by intentionally doing this, and showing that it is possible, I am now in a place where I can now, that is like now my next, career shift is to start producing and also be like, hey, there's all these other things that you can do with this, So yes, that's how I've been claiming that power, and it's been very exciting. And also I do remember the first time when I was like, I think I'm gonna intentionally do this. I was also terrified because I had never, I had that mindset of like, well, I'm gonna put myself in a box if I always am. And I'm like, wait a minute, no. So by being intentional about that, it has opened up a lot of doors, and I can't wait to keep opening more doors and break windows and all that stuff for other people.
Yes. So there's so many myths about our community, just so many. I know growing up, I come from a unique family that had lived on the border for as long as was Mexico, frankly, here in Texas. And I remember people telling me stories about what they expected of Latinos, particularly like Latino men, and that just didn't really jive with my experience. And certainly, if there's any myths about patriarchy, they apply to numerous communities, not just the Latino one. And so, I'm just curious for you all, what are the myths that you wish you could bust with what are the myths that you wish you could bust with the power that you have in creating the spaces that you're creating and the art that you're creating?
Yeah, I love that question because, as I was listening to Carmen and Vico, I also think it's important to first, we have to recognize that stories organize societies, stories organize economic systems. And we are in an economic reality that has been shaped by colonialism, by the enslavement of Africans, by stolen land and stolen labor and stolen culture as well. And that worldview organizes our society. And so when I think about culture, I think about we need to heal from what happened in our homelands. The genocide, but also the pain of a patriarchal system that has hurt generations and generations of women, femmes, non-binary people. Those are things that I want to leave behind. I want to really, I sometimes, as the daughter of two immigrants who were very invested in Catholicism, and I saw how homophobic they were towards me and my brother, I really want to release so many myths that I feel have been very painful and toxic to our community. And those include the myths that there is only two genders and that genders are supposed to behave in a certain way. The myth that if we just work hard, we will earn our way, because you know what? Our people have been so exploited, and we believe this myth that if we just work hard, when the reality is they stole our land. They took it from our home countries, and they left our home countries devastated. I would also say the myth also that there's a certain part of family structures that I think need to evolve. And when I think about, how now we're able to have chosen family, we're able to build communities and families that go beyond this nuclear idea. I really think that the kind of healing we need, especially in pandemic, is about being interconnected. And so I want to revisit all of these stories that actually caused a lot of pain. And then finally, I would say the story of how a Latina needs to be, because let's remember, the most famous Latinas we have, at least projected back to us, Selena, Frida, they're these very sort of stereotypes that we need to move beyond. And I want to see a full spectrum of what it means to be empowered and fully expressed in whatever gender we want to be expressed in. And so that's what I'm excited about. And then one last thing is just that I love the hood. I grew up in Oakland. I love all my hoods. But you know what? We're not just in the hoods. We are in high places. We are professionals. We're the heads of companies. And I would just like to see more diversity in the labor that is reflected, especially back on TV.
I love that. Anyone want to jump in? Does that inspire anyone?
Yeah, go for it, Carmen.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say, I love y'all. The energy here is so contagious. Vico, you said it correctly. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so inspired by this conversation. I feel like, why haven't we had these conversations before? And so one, I want to dismantle this idea that we've been speaking to each other and actually have us talk more to one another, because if we don't speak to one another, then we're not ever going to have this contagious energy going, and we're never going to be able to really question ourselves and even our identity. Just hearing Fabiana speak and, thinking about the nuclear family, thinking about, this binary of she, her, him, her, whatever we're creating, right? Those are things that have been imposed on us, right? Like if we really think about who we were, from the indigenous times, like colonization has really brainwashed us. I think about when you were talking about power, I was thinking about just the way in which Latinos vote, right? It's so conservative based on this idea of church, right? Of religious identity that really is not who we are. And so we struggle and we think that we're sinners because of the fact that we don't fit into these boxes that are placed on us. I think one of the myths that I also want to support Fabiana in breaking is the fact that we have to work hard for everything, right? And like, why can't we just work smarter? Why can't we work in collaboration? Why can't resources be put on our communities? I think that, as philanthropy has actually sponsored this conversation, I want philanthropy to also stop siloing us in issue areas. Like not all of us crossed the border. The border actually crossed us. Like Fabiana said, we are on stolen land. This, part of this country was Mexico, right? And when are the reparations to Mexicanos going to happen for those that were displaced and deported to a country that wasn't theirs, right? I also feel like, these silos, I work in the space of criminal justice, gender justice, and oftentimes when people hear my name, Carmen Perez, right? I got the nopal in the forehead. You could see I'm Latina, but they're like, oh, you work in immigration. I'm like, no, I work in criminal justice. I work on stopping police brutality. And it's because we fund Latinos in a certain sector that we think they are part of. And we don't realize that climate change impacts us. Reproductive justice impacts us. Criminal justice, police accountability, state violence impacts us. So I want to dismantle this idea of this monolith of the Latino that even looks like me, right? The fair skin, the black hair, like we all need the green hair, right? We need to make sure that we're also centering, Black Latinos, Afro Latinos, Indigenous Latinos, and that we make more room. I think about representation and how that is power. The reason why I became a national co-chair for the Women's March on Washington, not because I needed to clean up some white ladies' mess or because I needed another job. I was already a CEO of an organization. It was because for me, I was like, if I'm in this role as a leader, other Latinas are going to see themselves in leadership and they're going to know that they could lead too. And so I'm going to leave it there, but because I know there's so much of this conversation that needs to go around. But again, like, let's just join arms together, continue to have these conversations, dismantle these boxes that are put on us, these silos, make sure that philanthropy invest in all our leadership, not just people who are working on immigration reform, but also people who are working in the arts, people that are working in criminal justice. And let's make sure that we continue to kind of address the colonization that is still in our mind based on what has happened to us.
Totally. I mean, we are multi-ethnic, multiracial, multilingual, multinational. We are non-binary. And I do want to let Vico jump in. I'm sure your mind is racing. I will also say you're on a panel with 3 Mexicanas, and I know that you're a Puerto Rican activist. And so we know about colonies. Like,
no, this is
what have we been doing to Puerto Rico?
No, this is, gosh, honestly, I literally just, I'm piggybacking on everyone because it's literally all of it. The more and more research I do on my own, because being from Puerto Rico, so much of our history has been told only from the US lens. So in a lot of the books that I read in school, it's like all through the US lens. So I've had to do my own like side research to actually learn my history and my story through our lens. But that's also so taboo because like a lot of people got silenced by disappearing or being murdered or whatever, but by doing that. So it's all very scary and exciting. But yes, I mean, honestly, so much of what we've been fed to is that colonized mind. So it's a lot of it is unpacking that, like removing all of that that's been ingrained in us every day, which again, also piggybacking on the working hard, like I have been ingrained to work my ass off to like do everything. And it's like, wait a minute, we also deserve to rest. That is also revolutionary. That is also incredible and powerful and should be our experience, right?
Yes. And I'd love to get some granular examples, like examples of stories that you all are seeing, or art that you're seeing, or even, politics that you're seeing that you're like, yes, to the point of the yes. This is the direction that we should be heading in. Again, just anyone who wants to jump in with examples of storytelling or art or politics that you're seeing that is just on track right now.
Well, on my end right now, the reason why I want to start getting on the producing end of the coin is because I just went to a film festival in Puerto Rico that was a queer film festival, and like seeing so many queer films en español, in Spanish, like speaking about queerness in my language was so incredibly powerful, and such a huge like piece of the puzzle that I was missing, because a lot of like my coming out and a lot of the things that I've learned in terminology has been in English. So a lot of me educating in Spanish about queerness has also been reclaiming my power and like connecting with myself and my culture. And then seeing that film festival and seeing non-binary people talk about their non-binary experience in Spanish, using inclusive language in Spanish, and connecting my Taino background with that queerness has been so incredibly powerful. So I want to see more of that. I want to invest in that. I want to put focus on that, because that is part of that, like unpacking and deprogramming and decolonizing our freaking cells. So that's where I'm at on that end. And obviously with that, connecting with folks like y'all, because I think that art and politics, I mean, like, we have such a big responsibility and such a huge influence in people. Yeah, I mean, it's all kind of like in there right now, but I'm like slowly like, connecting the dots, but I'm excited to see where that goes and how much change we can create with all of this.
That's awesome. I want to hear from everybody on this one. What are examples that you're seeing that are giving you life right now?
Yes. Well, first, I am Peruvian. I am the daughter of Afro-Peruvians. So,
I heard you say California, and I was like, oh.
From the
I should have known better.
Yes, all good. So I have been really excited and inspired first by Black Renaissance in TV and film. I mean, when I see shows like Pose, I May Destroy You, Pose, I loved how we got to see a different lens of the 80s and really who began the queer liberation movement, right? And an uplifting of transgender characters that just blew my mind. I May Destroy You, how we talk about sexual assault. And, as somebody who is very committed to reproductive justice, I am dying to see stories about abortion. I want to see stories about Latinas and how we deal with both giving life, but also sometimes having to have an abortion, right? I want to see that. And I'm incredibly inspired by America Ferrera and Gentified and how they are breaking new models. Gloria Kelly Calderon with her new show With Love on Amazon, a love story. And so what and actually as a climate person, I am from the region that has the lungs of the world, right? The Amazonas are in Peru and in Ecuador. And when I was at the UN climate meeting in Glasgow, and I saw the amazing stories from indigenous folks talking about Mother Nature, right? The forests, the oceans, I realized like, wow, our stories in Hollywood disconnect us to our mother. And I want to hear stories about our relationships to all that is alive, to plants, to the fish, to the trees, to the animals. And so I'm excited about that, about how we can weave in indigenous storytelling. I love Reservation Dogs. I love that for the first time last year, you had 2 native shows. And so I'm looking forward to spaces where we actually don't need a native show or a Latinx show, but we have a show about Oakland, which was brown, black, and Asian, right? And we have shows that are actually, we're included in, as opposed to, I think, at this point, we are less than 5% of characters on television. We're hardly leads. And so I think that also showing the diversity of who we are. With Love features Afro-Latinx characters. And I would say the last thing I would say is on the climate tip, I am so excited that Don't Look Up has been, number 1, 2, 3 on Netflix. And I'm just like, I can't do no more white stories on climate. I want to see climate stories that show the most impacted, about hurricanes, whether it's Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Katrina, where are those stories in fiction? And so I'm also hungry for that bridge.
That's so true. I'm so glad you brought that up. So powerful. Carmen, what are you seeing that's giving you inspiration?
To agree with both of them. With Love has me glued to the TV. I'm really disappointed that Netflix canceled Gentefied. I think that was such a great show and has canceled so many Latinx shows. So let's just name that. But I think With Love for me has been one that has really warmed my heart. It's also made me cringe, right? Like bringing certain things into my home that I've never experienced, but that I need to open my mind to. And the fact that we do have a trans Latina on screen, we have Afro Latinos on screen. It's just a beautiful love story for me. Just the I always say I come from a family that is not like your average family. We are crazy, we are dysfunctional, but we are functional as a familia. And I love all my siblings, I love my parents, I love them, all my nieces and nephews. And so for me, With Love was that, right? It was like still loving people with all the shit that they have. So I want to see more, and I want to see us represented at every level, but I do want to see the victories. I want to see the stories of the Mexican astronaut from Stockton, California on a screen, right? I want my children to be inspired and to see themselves in leadership. And I think oftentimes, I'm not here to clean up anybody's mess. And there's this idea that when you're working in a space, you're here to clean up. And it's because that's the role that we've played for so many years, is the help or the maid. And so I want to continue to see us on screen. I want to continue to be elevated in music. And I want all our languages to be spoken. Vico said Spanish, Nahuatl, whatever it is, let's tell those stories. Let's tell them in these languages, and let's show all our identities and all our complexities.
Yeah, I love that. Before we start thinking about kind of the wrap up, I think we need to have an explicit conversation about racism in our own community. I think, but all of you have brought up on a number of instances in this conversation, times when Chicanos in the Latinx community have worked in deep coalition with Black power movements and in deep coalition with Indigenous movements. And it's a reminder to me that the binary really is a tool of oppressive politics. And this binary not just implicates the way we relate to gender, but it also relates to the way we relate to color. And in the United States, there is a very clear march towards creating binaries right now. This is black and white. They're drawing color lines. I think it's really important for us in the Latino community and the Latinx community to make sure that we are pushing against those color lines and building solidarity. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Where do you see that organizing happening, or that art happening in a way that's really pushing on that paradigm?
For me, that's the work that I've done for many years. I've worked to do Black and Brown solidarity in prisons. I worked inside Tracy prison that is now shut down in the state of California. But I used to work with the Mexican American Culture Committee and the African American Culture Committee and organize Juneteenth, Cinco de Mayo, Black History Month collectively together, really trying to do away with the institution of racism within the institution that created it, right? And that's my life's work, but I also learned it from my elders, like Gaylord Thomas out of Chicago, who runs an organization called Safe in My Brother's Arms, who does Afrocentric rites of passage, as well as Nana Alejandres, the founder of Barrios Unidos, who works in prisons with Black and Brown communities. I feel like that story that you're sharing is a way in order for us to not reach across the aisle, right? I will say what I've noticed in the last couple of years, and particularly more of an uprise when Trump was elected, was this anti-Mexican rhetoric that was happening, right? And how no one really stood up to it. We all kind of laughed, oh, well, as long as he's not talking about our community. And so when we say things like, in a very aggressive way, I'm not one of them, or I'm not, and that's also anti-Mexican, right? I feel like, yes, we're wanting to have conversations, but I think what's happening, or what's happened, is the fact that we don't know the history of this country and how it was founded. And so my mother being from Mexico, I remember her talking about my father and saying, how come, your cousins are, incarcerated, or, all these things. And I'm like, Mom, because not everybody has bootstraps to pull up, right? And I talked about the continued oppression that this government has had on Mexicans that were born here from the early times when it was stolen. And so she didn't quite understand. And I had to educate her about what also happened with African Americans for 400 years, right, when it pertained to slavery. And I think we need to have those courageous conversations. And if we're not having them at home, but yet we're calling out people, we participate in this call out culture, I think that's a little dangerous. But I think oftentimes some of that comes from the fact that we ourselves don't even know the history. Hearing Fabiana talk about Oakland and the Black Power movement and all those different things is not really a realistic conversation that we have with other Latinos, right? We're so caught up, and rightfully so, in trying to survive, right? That it's really hard to understand somebody else's struggle. We saw that in the BLM movement, when folks were saying, well, what about us Latinos? Don't Latino lives matter, right? Not understanding that if we say, Latino lives matter, it's co-opting what Black people have done, right? So I think that the conversation needs to happen. I think we also need to learn the history of this country and the different players, from New Yorkers to Chicanos to African Americans to even, Japanese Americans, Chinese folks, API folks, all that. We need to learn it. And we also need to figure out how to reach across the aisle. But more importantly, we need to also assess how we contribute to the ism in our own communities, not only as it pertains to Afro Latinos, but also as it pertains to those that are consistently being attacked by this administration or even this government.
Yeah, I love that you added the bit at the end. I would critique my own question right now and even say, solidarity with Black community, Indigenous community, API community, that's not actually always different communities either. We have Black Afro Latinos, we have Indigenous Latinos, we have people from all backgrounds represented within our own construct. So I think it's a really important note that you ended on that. Anyone want to add anything to that? Or
yeah, I would also add, not only do we not fully understand the history of what happened in this country, but on these lands, in this hemisphere, I mean, there was a purposeful erasure of indigeneity and our African roots through a program called mestizaje, la raza cósmica, right? That somehow we are one race. And, having grown up, my father was Afro-Peruvian, my grandmother, and I just never saw reflections of mixed race families, never in Spanish language television and hardly in English television. So I also think that we have to unlearn narratives that have been passed down for hundreds of years from our home countries, and also in our contemporary lives, like really align and learn from Black liberation movements. I mean, for me, having been mentored by Emory Douglas, the Minister of Culture of the Black Panther Party, meeting Bobby Seale, Sonia Sanchez, Kathleen Cleaver, and seeing and understanding that when we unite and when we can actually address white supremacy, right, and unlearn it and get decolonize our minds too. I love that Steve Biko talked about that the mind is also something that the oppressor uses. And the way to do that is through culture, introducing new stories, and also using culture to heal from wounds that haven't healed and that actually haven't even been tended to. And I think that the wound of slavery across this hemisphere at a time when Indigenous people have been wiped out by genocide is a deep, deep healing space that we need to examine, so that we could also move towards truth and reconciliation, and then of course reparations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to drop this one fact on you all for closing reactions. This is a call to action. The call to action is to my colleagues in philanthropy, folks with power to move resources. This is the call to action time. So here's the fact. There's 62 million Latinx people in this country, and 1% of philanthropic dollars goes to initiatives to Latinx people. What do we do, guys? What's the call to action? Quick round, everybody goes.
Yes, the call to action is that we need to name it and to grade these philanthropies and require them to do 20-30% funding. We just saw the donors of color do this with climate funders. Climate funders ain't giving money to BIPOC-led climate organizations, and they got called on it through a public accountability campaign. And so I think, especially in the age of wealth inequality, we not only need to liberate the dollars, we actually have to have systems to hold funders accountable and ask them, A, show us your reporting, and B, how are you transitioning over the next 3 to 5 years to make sure that these dollars are going to Latinx community? Will you join our pledge? Who is going to be the first group of funders who takes that bold, courageous move and sets the tone for the rest of the field?
Vico.
I will just say, what are you waiting for? Drop those bills. What's up? It's 2022. Let's get it going. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're tired.
I love it. Carmen?
I will say that philanthropy and the media need to stop siloing Latinx issues and need to support us financially, allow us to convene ourselves, allow us to come together to identify solutions within our communities. And so we need that money. We need to be invested in. We need to be brought into the decision-making tables. So don't fund us as a charity, but bring us into the strategy sessions where you're trying to come into our communities. Bring us in. We know how to be in our communities. And also invest in our leadership. Invest in Monica, invest in Fabiana, invest in Vico, invest in Carmen Perez. We need you to invest in us, because if we're looking at sustaining a movement, it needs to come with dollars. So yes, join the pledge to support entities like the Latinx House, to support leaders like us and allow us to convene ourselves, but also bring us to the table so we could co-create with you about where this money goes.
Yeah, and give us back the money that you extracted from us. Like, give us back the money that was extracted from our communities, because people built their wealth off our labor. And so this is not about charity. This is about repair and returning the resources to the communities from which it was stolen from.
So true. That's why I got into politics, actually. Monica knows this too from the old times. I used to be a labor lawyer at the cross section of immigration rights. And there's only so many wage claim cases that I could sit through where another group of Latino workers, immigrant workers did amazing amounts of work and were never paid for their work. There's only so many of those cases you can sit through before you realize the entire system needs an overhaul. So I want to thank you all for doing what you do to overhaul this system in the ways that you do it. You are each so powerful, and I'm so grateful to you. Thank you. This is a great conversation.
Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Latinx House.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Gracias.